Hi, I'm Lena at 3:00 a.m. I lay on the living room floor, my leg broken, blood dripping from my mouth, begging my mother to stop him. She didn't. She just watched, but that night wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point, the truth. My mother erased me long before the bruises ever showed. She changed my birth certificate, stole my scholarship, told the world I was unstable. They believed her. Now I'm speaking for every daughter who was told to be quiet, to be grateful, to stay small. Why would a mother choose a man over her own child? Why would a family rewrite history and leave you out of the story? And how do you rebuild your life when the people who broke you still call it love? Let me tell you what happened. I woke up to the sharp taste of blood in my mouth and the sound of my own breathing. Shallow, panicked, uneven. My cheek was pressed against the hardwood floor of the living room, cold and sticky beneath me. My left leg bent the wrong way, and when I tried to move, the scream that tore through me wasn't planned. It just escaped, pain like I'd never known, and there she was. My mother, Vera, stood at the entrance of the hallway, wrapped in a pale blue robe like she'd just stepped out of bed, arms crossed, expression blank. The only movement was the slight sway of her slippered foot, tapping gently against the carpet. "Mom," my voice cracked. "Please?" Dexter was still yelling, his voice bouncing off the walls like bullets ricocheting. I couldn't even remember what triggered it this time. Something about money, something about me causing problems, and then the blow came, a boot hard straight to my ribs. I had cried out, fallen, and that's where I stayed. But still, I looked at her. Even after everything, I thought she'd stop him. That instinct doesn't die easily. The child inside me still remembered when she used to brush the knots out of my hair while humming Pity Clean. The woman who'd once screamed when a bee landed on my shoulder and yanked me away so quickly, I cried, not because I was stung, but because her panic scared me. She'd pulled me away from pain before. I believed she would do it again. She didn't move. Dexter stopped, chest heaving, wiping sweat from his brow like it was just another job done. Then he turned and walked out of the room, past her, didn't say a word, didn't even look her in the eye. I lay there shaking, crying, and she stepped forward. For a moment, I thought she was coming to help me. Her shadow fell across my face. She bent slightly, not kneeling, just enough so I could hear her whisper, "You should have just signed the loan, Lena." Then she turned and walked away. I don't remember passing out, but when I opened my eyes again, there were paramedics. One knelt beside me, asking questions I couldn't answer through the pain. Another one called out numbers I didn't understand. I caught a neighbor's face at the door, Mr. Kellerman from next door, his eyes wide, mouth tight. He didn't say anything, just watched as they lifted me onto a stretcher. The hospital lights were blinding. They always are. Too clean, too white, too loud in their own way. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching pieces of conversation I didn't understand until I heard the unmistakable sound of heels. Hers, Vera's shoes had a rhythm, controlled, never rushed. She sat in the chair next to the bed as I came to. No hug, no hand squeeze, just her voice, flat and rehearsed. You made things difficult for everyone again. I turned my head away. Back then when I was 10, I used to think I was the problem, that I needed to shrink myself to fit into the world she wanted. I remember standing in the hallway, watching her kiss Dexter after he came home from work. The way she lit up, laughed in a way I never made her laugh. I remember thinking, if I'm quiet enough, maybe I won't get in the way. Good daughters don't cause scenes. Good daughters are grateful. Good daughters don't ask why their birthdays go uncelebrated or why the family photo wall doesn't have a single picture of them past kindergarten. I learned to be silent. I perfected it. Now I was lying in a hospital bed. The bruises already blooming along my ribs, the bandage tight around my leg, a dull throb behind my eyes. A nurse came in and read off the damage like it was a grocery list. Broken fibula, 3 cracked ribs, mild concussion. She looked at me with soft eyes. "We can report this if you'd like. There's support available." I didn't answer right away because the last time I said something when I was 17 and Dexter grabbed my arm too hard in the garage and left a mark. I told a counselor. That counselor called my mother. Vera marched into the school the next day, crying and outraged, insisting I was just trying to ruin her marriage. said I was dramatic, troubled, needed attention. They believed her, so this time I just nodded and said, "No, thank you." It was almost dawn when the room emptied out again, just me and the distant beep of monitors. I stared at the ceiling, blank, white, like a canvas with nothing worth painting. The ache in my bones wasn't just physical, it was ancestral. It was the pain of women being told to endure, to hush, to take it and not make waves, and it hit me. If I left this hospital and went back to silence, back to pretending, back to being the grateful daughter, then I'd be laying in that hallway again someday. Or worse, I wouldn't be. If I walk out of here again with nothing but silence, I'll never walk out again. Not truly. I reached for my phone. My hands shook as I opened my contacts. I scrolled down, Vera. I hovered over the name for just a second. Then I hit delete, and it felt like freedom. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd bought secondhand from a moving sale the year I got promoted. It was a little wobbly on one leg, but I'd always liked the imperfection. That morning, the sunlight poured in through the blinds, just enough to catch the dust motes in the air, swirling like snowflakes I'd never get to hold. My right leg rested on a chair wrapped in a thick white cast. The Velcro strap had started irritating my skin, but I hadn't bothered to adjust it. A half-open cereal box sat in front of me. I tried tearing the flap with one hand. It ripped unevenly, the bag inside spilling a few pieces onto the counter. They bounced and rolled to the floor unbothered. I stared at them for a while. I knew I wouldn't be able to bend down to pick them up. The silence in the apartment was heavy, broken only by the tick of the wall clock I'd hung 2 years ago in a fit of optimism, thinking a few decorative changes would make this place feel more like a home. But a clock doesn't change the atmosphere. Not when the people who raised you never taught you what home really means. I pulled my phone closer and scrolled through the gallery. For some reason, I paused on an old photo I hadn't looked at in years. A family vacation in Florida, Disney World. I was about 14. In the corner of the image, you could see me barely cut off by Vera's arm as she wrapped it around Dexter and Nico, beaming like I was someone else's child who wandered into the frame. She never even asked me to smile. My mind drifted further back to the year I turned 16. I had just applied for a full academic scholarship. It was one of the rare moments I felt hopeful. I needed my birth certificate to finish the application. I remember walking into the kitchen and asking her for it. She handed it to me without looking up from her coffee. That's when I saw it. Father, Dexter K. Maddox. I froze. My real father, James Harrison, died when I was 5. A car accident, quick and brutal. I didn't remember much about him, but I remembered enough to know he wasn't Dexter. I looked up at Vera, confusion twisting in my chest. "This isn't right," I said, holding up the form. "I had to update it," she replied flatly, still sipping her drink. "For school records, don't be dramatic, don't be dramatic." That was her catchphrase, the duct tape she slapped over any emotion she didn't want to deal with. Weeks later, I waited anxiously for a letter from the scholarship board. I checked the mail daily, each time, hoping today would be the day, but nothing ever came. Finally, I asked my guidance counselor if they had heard anything. "You didn't get it?" she asked, brows furrowing. "They sent a notice weeks ago." I felt my stomach drop. She pulled up the record. It had been awarded, the letter sent. When I got home, I tore through the house. Something inside me knew. I went into Vera's sewing room. The one space she said was off limits. I opened the second drawer of her desk and found it tucked under a pile of fabric scraps and receipts. A white envelope, my name written in clean print, the seal still unbroken. I opened it. There it was. Congratulations, terms, deadlines, and now too late. I remember walking into the living room holding the letter. Vera was folding laundry. "Why?" I asked, voice shaking. "Why would you hide this?" She didn't even look up. "You couldn't handle college," she said casually. "I saved you from disappointment." I stood there in shock, no anger, just the cold realization that this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't forgetfulness. She had never planned for me to go anywhere, not physically, not emotionally, not anywhere beyond the walls she controlled. I sat in the armchair for a long time after she left the room. Everything around me suddenly felt unfamiliar, like a movie set I had wandered onto by accident. And now, years later, sitting in my apartment with a cast on my leg and bruises still darkening along my ribs, that same feeling returned, the ache that told me I had been kept small on purpose. I pulled out my notebook, knotted diary. Diaries were for people waiting to be heard. This was a dossier. I started listing everything. The birth certificate, the scholarship letter, the phrases she used to cut me down. I didn't censor. I didn't explain away. On one page, I wrote the words, "She doesn't lose control. She is the control." As I flipped through pages, my eyes caught on a birthday memory. One of the last ones, she acknowledged sort of. I had baked my own cake. Boxed mix, uneven frosting, but I was proud. I left it on the counter to cool, planning to surprise myself later with candles and a wish I didn't believe in. That evening, Vera hosted a small gathering for Nico's test results. She took the cake, added, "Congrats, Nico," in gel icing and set it in the center of the table. People clapped, took pictures. I stood by the fridge, pretending I wasn't supposed to be celebrated that day. She'd erased me so thoroughly, she didn't even notice the date. I closed the notebook, tightening the Velcro strap on my cast. The pain flared, but I welcomed it. I whispered, "You erased my name once. I'm going to make sure everyone remembers it now." Then I stood, not just on one leg, but on the bones of truth finally pieced together. It took me longer than usual to get dressed that morning. I wasn't rushing to go anywhere. I just wanted to feel like myself again, or maybe figure out who that even was now. My cast made every step slow, deliberate. Every shirt I pulled over my head caught the edge of a bruise. Every movement reminded me I was still healing inside and out. I made a cup of coffee, then stood by the window as it brewed, watching the street below. Quiet, overcast. Akron was never really loud, but on days like this, it felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. While the coffee cooled, I picked up my phone and opened Facebook, mostly out of habit. I hadn't posted anything since the hospital. I didn't want pity, but my thumb hovered over the red notification bubble. One tag, a picture. I opened it. There she was, Vera, standing between Dexter and Nico. All three of them smiling, holding up slices of cake, celebrating our boy's big win. The caption read, followed by clapping hands and hearts from her church friends. The cake, my cake, same frosting design. Same blue and white piping I always used. I stared at the background, the kitchen wall, the vase on the table. That was my cake plate. I had made that cake the night before my last birthday alone in my apartment because I knew no one else would. I dropped it off for them out of guilt, thinking maybe they'd still want a piece. I told myself it didn't matter. Apparently, it did matter, just not to me. I leaned back, my stomach turning. It wasn't the first time she'd erased me from something I was supposed to own. Years ago, I had spent the whole afternoon baking my own birthday cake, box mix, dollar store candles, and frosting from a tub. It was crooked, and the color came out more gray than white, but I was proud of it. That night, Vera had guests over, family, friends, some people from Dexter's job. She took the cake I'd left on the counter and added letters on top with red gel icing. "Congrats, Nico." I stood there watching her slide it onto the dining table like it had always belonged to him. "We're celebrating his acidity results," she said. "Such a proud moment for our family." No one said a word about my birthday, not even in passing. I remember holding the lighter in my hand, thinking maybe I'd go light the candle on a slice for myself later. I never did. By midday, I was back at the kitchen table. This time, it wasn't cereal in front of me. It was a stack of printed photos, school letters, and an old high school program I had dug out of my storage bin. I spread them out like a puzzle I was just beginning to understand. There was one photo I couldn't stop looking at, my high school graduation. I was standing in the gymnasium, cap slightly askew, honor cords draped around my neck. I looked proud. I had reserved 2 seats, one for Vera, one for Dexter. They never showed. After the ceremony, I waited by the curb in my gown and heels, watching other families hug and take pictures. I had stood still, trying to smile, trying to tell myself they were just late. They never came. The scent of that day still lived in my memory. The metallic tang of rain in the air, the smell of charcoal from someone's barbecue drifting across the street, and the cheap perfume of the girl who stood too close to me in line. But mostly, it smelled like nothing, like absence, like the kind of quiet that settles over you when you realize no one's coming. I printed the graduation photo on glossy paper and circled the 2 empty seats in red ink. Not to be dramatic, just to remind myself it wasn't a dream. This was my reality. I didn't want to forget anymore. I clipped the photo to a manila folder labeled Records. Next to it, I added copies of the scholarship letter, my altered birth certificate, and screenshots of text messages with Vera over the years, cold, clipped, full of passive digs and disappointment disguised as concern. This wasn't about revenge, it was about record-upping. For once, I wanted my truth to be organized. As I stood to return the folder to the desk, my phone buzzed. One message, "Lena, it's Juno. I heard what happened." "Can we talk?" I froze. Juno. My heart hiccuped, a strange mix of hope and caution surging in my chest. She was the only friend I had before Vera decided she was a bad influence. We were inseparable in middle school. Matching bracelets, shared books, notes passed between classes. Then one day, Vera picked me up early from school and said, "She's not your kind of people. You don't need friends like her." I never saw her again until now. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply. "Yes, I think it's time someone else knows the whole story." I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. I didn't need the whole world to listen, just one voice to say, "I believe you." After replying to Juno, I left my phone on the windowsill and sat in silence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to fill the room with background noise. No soft music, no TV murmuring in the background, just me and the faint hum of the refrigerator. That peace didn't last. There was a knock on the door. 3 sharp raps, not aggressive but firm. I moved slowly, careful not to jar my healing leg. When I opened the door, a man in a brown postal jacket stood holding a large envelope. Certified mail, I signed the form without speaking, then shut the door and stared at the envelope like it was radioactive. I already knew who it was from before I turned it over. Dexter. The return address wasn't even theirs. It was a P. Oh, box tied to his work, probably to avoid anything being traced to their home. Typical. I walked to the kitchen, ripped the envelope open, and pulled out the documents. A mortgage contract, a signature page highlighted in yellow, and a post-it note attached that read, "Let's put this behind us. Just need your signature to close." I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I lit a match, held it to the corner of the page, and dropped the burning pile into the sink. The paper curled and blackened, the ink warping before it vanished in a wisp of smoke. I watched until every corner was ash. He really thought that after everything, after the hospital, after Vera's silence, that I would still sign. My phone vibrated again. Another text, this time from an unsaved contact, a local number. "We just need a little support, Lena. Stop being so difficult." No name, but I didn't need one. Vera never left fingerprints. That night I couldn't sleep. So I wrote not in my case journal, but a letter to myself. It started as a simple sentence. You are not responsible for their survival. The next day, the sunlight filtered through the blinds, catching the dust in the air. It reminded me of a dinner from a few months ago. Vera had invited me to the house, rare at that point. The tone was suspiciously sweet. She said they wanted to reconnect, make things right. I agreed out of sheer exhaustion. Maybe I thought there was still a chance even after everything. The table was set with cloth napkins. Vera had even used the crystal glasses, something reserved for guests or holidays. Dexter smiled too wide. Nico barely made eye contact. After the lasagna and awkward small talk, Vera brought out dessert. Then she placed a folder on the table. "We found our dream home," she said, clasping her hands like she was announcing an engagement. Dexter leaned in, and we're finally in a position to get it, just one hurdle. With my job change, the bank needs someone with a stable credit history. Your name would be perfect, just as a formality. I didn't touch the folder. I'd like to review it, I said slowly, with someone just to understand everything. Ver's smile didn't even twitch, but Dexter's face changed. So you don't trust your own family? He asked, voice tightening. I looked at Vera, expecting her to chime in, to soften the blow, to maybe even defend my right to ask questions. But she just sipped her wine. No rush, she said, but the bank needs an answer by next Thursday. That was the last time I stepped foot in their house. A week later, Vera stopped calling. Nico stopped replying to texts. And one morning, I noticed a login attempt on my email from an unknown device. My bedroom door lock was scratched up. Nothing was stolen, but something felt off. I checked behind the lamp, then under the dresser. That's when I found it. A tiny black pinhole camera, taped beneath the shelf facing my bed. It had a green blinking light, no longer transmitting. I froze. Then I yanked it out of the wall and dropped it in a glass of water. I didn't scream. I didn't call the police. I called Vera. Was that supposed to scare me? I asked, voice even. There was a pause. Then she sighed like I had embarrassed her. A good daughter doesn't keep secrets, she said. Especially not in my house. I closed my eyes, my hand clenched around the phone. I'm not your house, I said, and I'm not yours. She hung up, and that was the end of pretending. I called Juno. She answered on the second ring. You said you know someone who understands privacy law? I asked. Yes, she said, and I think he's going to want to hear your story. After we hung up, I opened my laptop, created a new folder, titled it Legal Drafts. I began documenting everything: screenshots, copies of signed documents, Vera's messages, the photo of the camera. I timestamped everything. I wasn't scared anymore. I was just tired of pretending. That night, I double-checked the locks on my apartment 3 times, bolted the bottom one, placed a chair under the handle for good measure. Then I sat down on the couch, turned off all the lights, and waited. I wasn't sure who I was expecting, Dexter, Vera, some cheap scare tactic, but instead of fear, all I felt was readiness. Let them come. This time, I be ready. The voice didn't match the knock. I expected roughness. Maybe a demand, maybe Dexter's familiar bellow masked as authority, but instead, it was a woman's voice, smooth, practiced, a smile hidden in every syllable. Hi, Lena. Sorry to drop by without calling. I opened the door an inch. Miss Boyne Thomason stood there, my high school English teacher, a scarf knotted neatly around her neck, holding a small paper bag like she was delivering cookies instead of decades-old confessions. I ran into Juno, she said softly. She told me you might want to talk. I let her in, not because I was ready, but because something inside me needed to hear whatever this was. We sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd turned into a war desk. Papers, timelines, legal codes, and photos spread out like puzzle pieces I'd finally found the courage to sort through. She placed the bag down, but didn't open it. I remember you, you know. She started fingers twisting her wedding ring around absent-mindedly. Not just as a student, but as someone I should have fought harder for. I didn't interrupt. I wanted her to keep talking before I gave her the chance to backpedal. I got an email once, she continued, from your mother. It was formal. She said you were struggling, that you had anxiety issues, and it would be better if you weren't placed in leadership roles. Class president, yearbook editor, even the poetry team. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. She used the words emotionally unstable. Said you needed fewer expectations, so you wouldn't spiral. I looked down at my hands, nails digging slightly into my palms. She framed it as protective. She added quickly. She made it sound like she was advocating for you. Advocating, I repeated flatly. I believed her. Ms. Thomason admitted. I'm sorry. You deserved better. I nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, but I accepted the truth. And at least she came here to say it out loud. When she left, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I opened the folder labeled evidence, added a new page. School suppression via fabricated mental health claim. I included the approximate date and her name. This wasn't spite. This was accuracy. That night, while others were probably binging TV or scrolling their way to sleep, I pulled out a blank poster board and started my wall of reality. At the top, I pinned the scholarship letter Vera had hidden. To the left, my birth certificate with Dexter's name, typed neatly where my father's should have been. Below that, a print out of the Facebook photo with the birthday cake that was meant for me. I added arrows, dates, red string connected one year to another like a conspiracy web, except mine wasn't fiction. Mine bled. I wasn't unraveling. I was remembering. By midnight, the board was half filled. The apartment was still lit only by the desk lamp and the soft glow of the fridge light. I forgot to close. Then the phone rang, not a call, a voicemail notification. It was Vera. I hit play and turned the speaker on low. Her voice poured through like syrup over glass, controlled, sweet in a way that made my skin prickle. You need to stop dragging people into this, Lena. This is a family matter. What you're doing, it's unnecessary, hurtful. Think of Nico. Think of how all this looks. We're still your family whether you like it or not. She paused, then added, Don't forget who raised you. I saved the message. I forwarded it to Malcolm. No response yet, but I knew he'd get it in the morning. He'd told me to document everything. The paper trail will always outlive the lies, he said. I returned to my desk and stared at the board. Then I added a printed transcript of the voicemail to the corner and labeled it. Emotional leverage masked as concern. When the sun came up, I made coffee and started my journal entry for the day. A routine now, grounding. Every entry began with the same line, Mom never hit me. She just deleted me. The pen hovered over the paper. Today, I added, but I'm redrawing the outline. Later that afternoon, I opened a drawer in my desk that I rarely used. Inside, a stack of old notebooks. I was looking for one in particular, one I'd hidden even from myself. It was maroon spiral, bound with the word creative writing written in silver marker across the cover from high school. I flipped through it slowly until I found the page. I remembered a letter, one I'd written, never mailed, addressed to my father. It said, I don't know what's true anymore, but I remember your voice. I remember the way you let me press the elevator buttons when we went to the bank. I remember you always smelled like cedar. I hope that means something. I closed the notebook. It meant something now. That night, I sealed 2 envelopes, one thick and heavy with pages of the legal complaint I was ready to file. All the documentation, all the evidence labeled clearly for Malcolm to review. The second envelope was smaller, thinner, only 1 page inside. I wrote Nico's name on the front. Inside, the message was simple. I don't blame you, but I won't protect you either. You deserve the truth. So read it. Ask her yourself and then decide who you are. I placed both envelopes on the table side by side. Then I whispered, let's see what truth does to a golden child. It was still early, not yet 9, when the mail truck rolled past my building. I stood by the window and watched as the carrier stepped out, slung her satchel over her shoulder, and made her rounds. I waited until she reached my building's mailboxes before slipping the envelope into the outgoing slot. No hesitation this time. The envelope was addressed to Nico. Inside, I'd placed 3 things. A certified copy of my original birth certificate, the one with my real father's name, James Harrison. A photo of the uncashed check from James's will that I'd found in Vera's drawer, and a short note in my handwriting that simply said, ask why she kept this from me and from you. I stood there for a moment longer after the slot clinked shut. The morning was gray, still damp from last night's rain. Something about the coldness in the air made my skin feel raw, like it too was remembering. I hadn't thought about Nico much over the past few weeks. He wasn't the enemy, not really, but he wasn't innocent either. He'd benefited from the system Vera built, a system that erased me piece by piece while spotlighting him as the good one, the obedient one, the real child. But kids ask questions, and I remembered one in particular. I must have been 17. He was about 11 Chinese. We were sitting at the kitchen table playing 2 truths and a lie. Something our English teacher had us do at the start of each semester. Just a silly game, something to kill time. My turn, Nico had said, grinning. I have a dog. I hate spinach. I have pictures of my dad in every room of the house. I laughed. You don't hate spinach. You ate it yesterday. He laughed too, but then his expression changed slightly. Hey, Lena, how come there aren't any pictures of your dad around? I remember the air tightening in my chest. I started to answer, but Vera came in just then, wiping her hands on a dish towel and said, "Nico, go finish your math homework." Just like that, the question died. Now, years later, I was handing that question back to him with evidence. I didn't expect a response right away, but I didn't have to wait long. By that afternoon, my phone buzzed. One new text. "What is this? Why now?" I stared at the words, reread them 3 times, and then replied, "Because you deserve to know, and because you were used too." There was no reply after that. Hours passed. I didn't press. I didn't chase. Instead, I focused on box that Juno had handed me earlier that day. She had stopped by after lunch, her coat still damp from the drizzle, and placed it gently on my table. "A friend of your father's kept this," she said. "He said it never felt right to throw it out." The box was unremarkable, just a plain brown cardboard shoebox, the corners taped. I peeled it open slowly. Inside, nestled in a crumpled grocery bag, was a cheap old flip phone. The screen was cracked, the battery swollen. It didn't power on, but tucked underneath it was a folded piece of paper, a typed log of text messages printed, time-stamped, sent over a span of 5 years from James Harrison to my old number. Messages I never received, dozens of them. My fingers trembled as I read. "Your mother doesn't want me involved, but I'm trying. I miss you every day. Are you okay? I worry. I left something for you at the bank. Ask for the manager. Happy 18th, you're still my girl." By the time I reached the last one, dated just 6 months before he died, my vision was blurred. It read, "I know I messed up, but I never stopped loving you." I sat down hard on the couch, the paper clutched in my hand. All that time, I thought he abandoned me. All that time, Vera had controlled what got through. She hadn't just rewritten my story. She intercepted the chapters. I walked outside needing air, the pages folded in my jacket pocket. The clouds had thinned, but the wind carried the kind of chill that sneaks into your bones when you aren't looking. A few blocks away, I reached the park. It was quiet. Just a few early joggers, a couple walking their dog. I found an empty bench near the pond, sat down, and let it all wash over me. I cried, not the silent kind, the deep shaking sobs that make your chest ache. I let my head fall into my hands. I didn't care who saw. She took everything. But as I sat there wiping my face with the sleeve of my coat, I realized something. She didn't own what was left, what I still had. My voice, my truth, my memory, those were mine. I would not give them up again. The wind picked up. I straightened my back and stared out across the water. By the time I returned home, it was nearly dusk. The street lights were just starting to flicker on, casting soft golden halos on the sidewalk. I walked inside, set my bag down, and turned on my laptop. The screen glowed. I opened the folder labeled Legal Drafts. A new document title, Complaint Draft 3. Cursor blinking at the top, I began typing. Defendant Vera Maddox. The courthouse didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like any tired building in Akron, slightly chipped brick, fluorescent lights too bright for early mornings, and hallways that smelled faintly of pine-scented cleaner and cold coffee. But that day, it was where I would draw the line. Malcolm was already waiting outside when Juno pulled up beside the curb and helped me out of the car. She didn't say much, just handed me a thermos of tea and gave my shoulder a quick squeeze. Malcolm nodded and walked us in through the glass doors. My hands gripped the evidence binder like a flotation device. The tabs poked out in bright colors labeled messages, surveillance, suppressed records, medical, and witnesses. I had spent nights organizing it down to the minute. There was no backup plan. This was the plan. At the front desk, the clerk gave me a tired glance. Name, Lena Marin. I said steady. She found my paperwork. You're the plaintiff in this case. Yes. My voice didn't shake. Plaintiff Lena Marin. There it was, said out loud, written down, permanent. The filing process didn't take long. 20 minutes maybe, but the weight of it would echo for years. The petition for a restraining order against Dexter was straightforward. The injuries, the hospital records, the photographic evidence of the bruises, the neighbor's call to 911, it was airtight. The civil complaint against Vera, though, that was personal, layered, intentional emotional harm, negligence, interference with educational opportunity, coercive control, psychological manipulation. It was a story most people wouldn't believe unless it came with proof. I had the proof. There was a brief pause when the clerk flipped through the materials, her brows lifting at one point. She didn't comment, just stamped it and handed it back. You'll be notified by mail when the hearing is set. Thank you. On the way out, Malcolm leaned toward me. You sure you're ready for the fallout? I didn't hesitate. She took everything but my name. I'm giving it back to myself. That afternoon, the process server delivered the documents to Vera's house. He'd been warned she could be hostile or worse, manipulative, but he reported back that she took them without a word, just opened the door, saw the envelope, and shut it again with trembling hands. The silence lasted 3 days. Then the letter arrived. No return address, just my name, handwritten in the familiar script I'd grown to hate. I opened it at the kitchen table, Juno sitting across from me. She had insisted on being there just in case. I didn't argue. She poured 2 cups of coffee while I unfolded the paper. It wasn't an apology, not even close. You've always been dramatic, Lena. It began. Your father said so too, back when we were married. You always saw pain where there was none, conflict where there was harmony. I stopped reading aloud, skimming instead. Each sentence more venomous than the last. You've made a mess of everything again. Dragging strangers into our family, making accusations, spreading lies. You broke this family. Congratulations. Juno was silent for a moment. Then she said, she really mailed that with her whole chest, huh? I laughed, a bitter sound at first, then almost light. She thinks she's still the main character. I folded the letter and slipped it into the binder under psychological warfare. We didn't talk much after that. Juno stayed a little longer, helped me reorganize a few files. Before she left, she paused at the door. She'll probably try to spin this her way, she warned. I know, I said, but spin doesn't work when people already feel dizzy. And sure enough, the spinning began. 3 days later, I got a message from a woman named Patricia. I didn't recognize the number, but the message read, Hi, Lena. I used to work with your mother. I heard about what's happening. She told people it was just another one of your episodes, but she did the same thing to her sister years ago. Took over her finances, isolated her. You're not crazy. You're just done. I read the message twice, heart-thudding, then responded simply, Thank you for telling me. She replied almost immediately, I wish someone had stopped her before. The floodgates opened after that. A friend of my father's sent an old voicemail she had saved. James's voice, soft and broken, saying, I don't know if she'll ever hear this, but tell Lena I never wanted it to be this way. A neighbor from down the street who used to babysit me when I was little sent a message through Juno. Your mother used to tell people you were difficult, that you had a mean streak. I never saw that. I saw a kid who barely spoke. People were watching, and for once they were seeing clearly. The truth doesn't always scream, but when it's told right, it roars. Late one evening, I retrieved the mail from the hallway slot. Among the usual junk and bills was a plain white envelope. Inside was single sheet, court hearing June 14th, 91 A.M., Family Court, room 206. I stared at the date, then walked to the kitchen, pulled a red marker from the drawer, and circled it on the calendar, bold, clear. Underneath, I wrote my real birthday because that was the day I would finally step out from under Vera's name and into my own. The courthouse was already busy by the time we arrived. Cars lined the street. People filtered through the security checkpoint with worn expressions and armfuls of paper. Some came for divorce hearings, custody battles, small claims. I came to reclaim my name. Juno parked the car in the lot across the street and turned off the ignition. Neither of us spoke for a moment. She reached for my hand, gave it one strong squeeze, then let go. Inside, Malcolm met us at the elevator, binder in hand. His tie was slightly crooked. He was always a little disheveled, like he'd been in a sprint just to exist. But he smiled when he saw me and nodded. You ready? As I'll ever be. We walked together through the double doors and into the courtroom. The room was quiet, cold, even though the sun had just started to warm the city after a week of clouds. I wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a gray blouse, black jeans, and the flats I'd saved for emergencies. Vera and Dexter were already seated at the defendant's table. She was dressed in soft pink, as if pastel could somehow soften the damage. Dexter sat rigidly beside her, jaw clenched, arms folded tight. There was one empty seat behind them. Nico wasn't coming. My name was called. I stood, walked forward, placed my right hand on the Bible, and took the stand. Malcolm approached the judge and introduced the case. Then it was my turn. I told them everything. I spoke clearly, calmly, like I was reading from a book I'd written. I spoke of the scholarship that vanished in Vera's desk drawer next to receipts and fabric samples. I described the quiet dismissal from school opportunities, the replacement of my father's name with Dexter's on my birth certificate. I told them about the camera, tiny, black, and blinking in my bedroom wall, about the boot against my ribs, the silence from my mother, and I begged for help on the floor. I wasn't just ignored, I said, locking eyes with Vera across the room. I was deliberately removed. There was a pause, the kind that sinks into your skin and makes the room shrink. Vera's attorney stood. Older gentleman, expensive suit. He approached slowly with the air of someone preparing to deliver a lecture. Ms. Marin, he began, would you describe yourself as emotional? I'm human, I replied. He smiled like he'd been waiting for that answer, of course, but would you say you've ever exaggerated situations in the past, seen events through a particularly sensitive lens? Malcolm started to rise, but I stopped him with a glance. I brought a binder, I said calmly, with receipts, screenshots, letters, witnesses. If I'm so emotional, why are you holding a folder full of proof? His mouth opened, then closed. The judge motioned for Malcolm. He stepped forward and opened the binder to a specific section. Inside was the necklace, small silver, with a charm shaped like a star. Vera had given it to me when I was a child, told me it was from her. Your mother's love, she called it. Malcolm pulled out 2 documents. The first was a dated store receipt. The second, a letter from James Harrison, my real father. In it, he wrote, I found the perfect gift for Lena. Please give it to her. Tell her it's from Dad. The courtroom didn't gasp, but I saw Vera's face change just for a moment. A flicker of something between rage and defeat. I watched her eyes drift downward, refusing to meet mine again. The judge took her time before speaking. Her voice was even deliberate. This court finds the claim substantiated. Mr. Dexter Maddox is hereby subject to a 5-year restraining order effective immediately. Ms. Vera Maddox will be held liable for emotional damages and compensatory restitution. She paused, then added, this court recognizes a pattern of long-term psychological manipulation, deliberate obstruction of opportunity, and emotional coercion as outlined in the exhibits. It was done. Outside the courtroom, Malcolm shook my hand. You did good, he said, voice low. Juno hugged me hard. You're free, she whispered, but freedom isn't instant. It unfolds slowly. Within 2 weeks, Dexter's business partner pulled out of their contract. Rumors spread. No one wanted to be associated with a man named in a civil suit for domestic abuse. Vera's job, an admin at a local dental practice, quietly let her go. Restructuring, they called it. People talk? Akron isn't that big. One night, I opened my messages and found a text from Nico. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I believe you. I stared at the words for a long time before responding. Thank you. That matters. He didn't reply, but he didn't have to. The silence was enough. That Friday, I came home from work. Yes, I'd started again part-time and found a box on my doorstep. No name, no label. Inside was a single envelope, a letter from her. It wasn't an apology. I didn't expect one. You think this is over? It isn't. That was the entire message. I folded it once, twice, and placed it in the back of the same binder I brought to court. Then I locked the binder in a cabinet because to me, it was over. The war, at least not the healing. 3 months had passed since the trial, and for the first time in what felt like years, I woke up and didn't flinch at the silence. It didn't feel hollow anymore. It wasn't laced with tension or filled with the echoes of words never said. It was just quiet, steady, peaceful in the way that comes, not with grand gestures or fireworks, but with the kind of stillness that settles like dust in a room that has finally stopped spinning. Like Neighbor you didn't notice moving in until one day you realized they'd been there all along, and they weren't leaving. That morning, I found myself standing at the front of a modest meeting room inside the Akron Community Center. It smelled faintly of Lemon's disinfectant and burnt coffee from metal carfs that had been reheated too many times. The linoleum floor was scuffed, the lighting too bright. Folding chairs were arranged in a loose semicircle, not quite even. There were 12 women in the room, all different, some older, some young. A few looked like they'd arrived out of curiosity. Others had that particular tightness in their shoulders that comes from knowing too much too soon. One woman sat clutching a tissue before anyone even said a word. Behind me, taped to the wall with painter's tape, was a banner I'd made from craft paper and a borrowed laminator. The letters were simple, uneven, family isn't always blood. I turned to face them. My name is Lena, I said. A pause, no need to rush. I used to think survival meant silence, that if I just stayed small enough, quiet enough, obedient enough, things would fix themselves, but the truth is, silence doesn't heal. It hides, and what hides too long? Rots, no gasps, no one clapped, but one woman in the back, her arms uncrossed. She leaned forward slightly, and that was enough. We talked for over an hour. Not just me, them too. Their stories poured out in pieces, raw, unpolished, sometimes barely coherent. Honest, one woman spoke about her husband cutting off their daughter after she refused to pretend everything was fine. Another said her family labeled her dramatic because she stopped hosting Christmas after a breakdown they never acknowledged. One woman, soft, spoken and fierce, simply said, "I divorced my mother." When it ended, some women lingered to chat quietly. Others slipped out, offering soft smiles on their way to the door. I stayed behind, folding the chairs slowly, carefully, still mindful of the old hip injury, healed but not forgotten. The cold made it flare up. But today, it didn't hurt as much. That's when I saw her, a girl maybe 16, 17, standing near the exit, arms tucked into the sleeves of an oversized sweatshirt, chin low, eyes darting around the room like she wasn't sure if she belonged. I recognized that posture. I'd worn it once myself, rigid, protective, armor of someone who's been told over and over that they're too much, too emotional, too inconvenient. I walked over slowly. "You okay?" I asked gently. She nodded barely. Then, so softly I almost missed it, she whispered, "I still live with her." That was all she said, but I knew who her was. I reached up to the necklace I wore every day. A simple silver chain, nothing flashy. It had once been a gift, something Vera had given me years ago, claiming it was hers to give. I later found out it had been my father's, the only thing of his I'd ever worn. I unclasped it and held it out to her. "Here," I said, "you don't have to keep it forever. Just until you're ready to let go of her." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just nodded and took it like it meant something more than jewelry, and maybe it did. That night, I sat on my couch, legs tucked beneath me, warm mug in hand. The sun had long since dipped behind the city skyline. The room glowed with low lamps and the soft hum of something familiar on the TV. I checked my phone before bed and saw a message from Juno. "You saved more than yourself." It said, "You redefined what family means for all of us." I stared at her words for a long moment, then typed back, "I guess I'm not the last broken girl." Somewhere across town, I imagined Vera in the same armchair she always used, the one in the corner of the living room, once decorated with throw pillows and perfectly curated lighting. Now it sagged under years of use and silence. She probably had the TV on, muted. Maybe she reached for the day's mail with her chipped manicure, sorted through bills and flyers, and found the small postcard announcing the next workshop. Maybe she scoffed. Maybe she read it twice. I'll never know. But sometimes I like to imagine she folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. Maybe even the same drawer that holds the unopened letter from my father, the one she claimed never came. And maybe, just maybe, every time she opens that drawer, something inside her twists. Not out of revenge, just consequence. A week later, the frost had just begun to lift from the sidewalks. When I returned to the park, same bench, same pond. The geese were louder than I remembered, and someone had left breadcrumbs by the edge. I sat down and pulled out my journal. It was nearly full now, every page stained with ink and memory, scribbles of grief and recovery, confusion and clarity. I flipped to the last page on it in my own hand. "You don't need an apology to move forward. Just proof you lived through it. I carefully tore it out, folded it delicately into a paper crane. I wasn't great at origami, but I had practiced this one. I held the crane in my palms for a moment. Then I let breeze carry it. It lifted, fluttered, caught the air, spun in a graceful arc before it sailed toward the pond, and landed near the water's edge. I stayed there for a while. No audience, no grand catharsis, just breathe, just space, just life. Inching forward, I closed my eyes for a moment, then spoke aloud, to the trees, to the wind, to whoever was listening. I didn't get the sorry. Another breath. I didn't need the sorry. A pause. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy. And then a smile, quiet, earned, and now I know. Sometimes the deepest wounds come not from strangers, but from people who share your last name. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by your own family, let this story remind you. Silence doesn't protect you. Truth does, and healing doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop waiting for one. What would you do if your own mother stood by while someone broke you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories that speak the unspoken.